Hey, Brad Clark here for Rigging Dojo. This is Blender Rosetta Stone for production artists. So the goal for this class is to understand the language of Blender as a production artist. You don't need to be told how to animate or what 3D is or how to work. You're already doing the work in the software of your choice, and now, for whatever reason, you want to learn Blender. I had to come at Blender quickly, and I hit a lot of stumbling blocks at first based on the language I spoke from other software. Blender has its own way of doing things, and to be able to even ask the questions you need to ask, you need to understand a lot of kind of background history on Blender and the way things work. So I hope this class helps you, and let's get going. Let's get a look at a few changes I'm going to recommend. They have added an industry key map, but the best advice is to leave it alone. Don't use it. It isn't going to be your industry. It's not going to be your key map. While some things may seem familiar, it makes it impossible to follow any tutorials or look up help because you're going to have to know the tool in order to understand how they changed it. It's fine to try it if you want, but I suggest you leave it alone. There are some changes, though, that I think will help, and we'll look at those right now. So the theme. There are themes in the preferences. There are some settings for making things feel snappier. I'm used to going left and right to zoom, so I found it much easier to have the zoom axis set to horizontal. Frame selected. Blender's default is the period key on a number keypad. You have to move your hand, and it's not convenient if you are on a laptop or just the F key, while it is used, a lot of times you're going to be fine setting it to frame selected. So let's jump over and find these settings and check out the preferences. Okay, so when you launch Blender, it's got its gray theme, 2.8 plus. I'm in 2.92 here. Is fine, but I found that there's a default theme in here under preferences that allows it to be a little nicer looking. So we're going to go jump over to Maya, and the theme isn't just about being in Maya, but it's about having familiar selection colors and interface viewport interaction colors, and it just helped me kind of keep track of what was selected. There is one little change in the theme, though, that we need to make for the NLA. So when we go down into the nonlinear animation tool, here at the bottom under theme space, this is a weird name, but basically it's just whatever's highlighted. So I'm going to go ahead and set it to orange, or you can set it to the same green color. It just needs to be a color so that you can actually see what's selected in the NLA. Navigation. Here is the zoom axis. When we hold control to zoom, I'm not used to I try to move sideways and nothing happens, and that's because you have to push forward to make it zoom in, and that's really not convenient or comfortable for my hand muscle memory. So we're going to switch this to horizontal. Now I can orbit, and now I can control left, right move, and it feels much better. Next, if we go ahead and zoom in on something, you can see how it animates in and zooms up. That feels slow and not snappy, although it looks pretty. So I'm going to set this to like 5. And I can frame up, and it just snaps right to the view. So while we're on the subject of framing, let's go ahead and look at the key map. And we can save off our own version of the Blender key map as we make changes. Here are the preferences also, where you're going to find like what spacebar does if you needed to do search or play. But let's go ahead and search for key binding. And I'm going to hit the period key. And here you can see that in each window, there are separate hotkeys. So depending on where you are, the hotkey is going to change. I'm just going to change for now the frame selected in the viewport, because right now number pad is not great. So I'm going to just click this button, and it's going to change the key immediately. So this is just another thing that's a little tricky. I'm going to not use search by key binding. I'm going to search by name and look for frame, 3D view, and here is the frame selected. So here it is, number pad. We click this, it says press any key. I'm going to hit F, and now I'm going to uncheck control. So in the outliner, show active is actually a different name, and we can change this to F as well. So now, if I've got something selected, I can frame it in the outliner and not just in the view. And then once you're done with that, you can save the preferences. The other thing that can help is basically turning off load UI. This way you don't open up someone else's layout for Blender and just cause all kinds of confusion. There's a bunch more settings that you can discover on your own, but those are my top tips for just kind of getting comfortable with Blender. The other thing you're going to immediately want to do is speed everything up so that you've got faster playback and make Blender run as fast as possible. First up, viewport anti-aliasing. I don't need 8 looking, I don't need that much smoothness. The graph editor, high quality display. If you've got a lot of mocap data and a ton of curves, again, this is something in Motion Builder I used all the time just to speed it up. There's a high quality display for the curves. Removing normals off of your mesh. This works in Max, Maya, and Blender as well. Not having normals customized and having to calculate all those extra vertices really speeds up your FPS big time. And Luciano has an awesome optimized video that I'm going to suggest you go watch after my talk, or when you're going through and setting this up. Let's jump over and fix a few more preferences. Edit preferences. Go to viewports. Here, change the anti-aliasing settings to at least single pass. If we're in the graph editor and we have a lot of curves, graph editor and view, you can turn off high quality display. And your curves are going to look a little funky, but again, you're going to boost your frame rate. Under the time editor, timeline, you can also do active editor and adjust what plays, and also change your frame dropping so that it plays and doesn't sample every frame. Again, these are all settings that we know in Maya, but just knowing where they are. Playback setting in the main timeline here gives you lots of choices to control what updates outside of the view, and also if you need to play at every frame or drop frames. While we're here, I'm just going to point out that the frame rate for Blender doesn't show up anywhere where you might expect. It is a render scene setting. So if you change your frame rate to render, that actually changes your FPS in the view. It's under this little render output properties, but this is the global scene rate. So when you need to change your frame rate, that's where you're going to do it. Global simplify. This one's got an asterisk because this doesn't necessarily speed things up, but if you have a character rig with lots of armatures and subdiv surfaces and other settings, you're going to want to know how to quickly set all that stuff off so you get maximum playback, and then toggle it back on, including particles like hair. All this stuff, we can use a simplify toggle. We were here in this little output properties to change frame rate. If we go right above that to render properties, there is a simplify setting. And this is kind of clunky to get to, so we're going to just click simplify on, and now you can see max subdivisions to 0. Turn all of this off so that we're at as fast as possible resolution-wise. Now you can right-click, and anywhere inside of Blender, you can right-click on a property, max subdivision, whatever it is. I'm going to click on simplify, and you can add it to a quick favorite or make it a shortcut key. In this case, I'm going to use a quick favorite because this is kind of like a mix between a shelf and a marking menu. So I'm going to add a quick favorite, and now when I hold Q down, I get my quick favorite menu, and I can turn on and off the use simplify setting for the scene. Now, each file will have its own simplify settings, but if you're trying to animate something and you're ready to play back, you can turn on use simplify and hit play, and you'll get a much faster frame rate. Compatibility. The first thing I did was launch Blender, click a bunch of stuff, and then I went, well, I don't know how to make stuff in here yet. I want to load up an FBX file. FBX is not Autodesk code inside of Blender. Don't expect it to work the way your FBX plugin somewhere else does. It's not going to. Blender bones are actual bones. They do not have joint orients. They're not joints where they're just a pivot point. They have length and display as bones like you'd find in Max or another bone-based system. Maya is joint-based, so is Motion Builder. Very different. So if you import an FBX from Maya the first time, you're going to possibly see it looking like this pincushion looking character, and that's because the FBX plugin tried to keep all of the joints aligned with the source. If you want to be able to load it into Blender and take it back out to Maya and have the orientation stay correct, or save it to Unreal and have the animation play, this is how it looks. There is a setting to import it in and have all the bones come in aligned so that they work more like IK bones in Blender. They assign weighting correctly. If you know you're never leaving Blender or you're not working with anything compatible and you're just trying to get a file in there to really play with Blender, then yeah, auto-orient the joints. Leaf bones. Another issue with joints is in Maya, right, we've got the idea that a joint could be, a joint, and then if we want it to have a display like bone property, we have to draw and add another end dummy, right? A little dummy joint or a null end joint. Because Blender bones are actual bones, they have length and a pivot point. We don't need this extra bone to display things. So if you know that in Maya, you've added end bones to all of the properties, you can turn this off so that you don't end up with basically a double bone sticking off everything. There is no merge animation, no ability to just FBX update and have animation come in. We'll cover actions in a little bit, but just keep that in mind. And scale issues. Blender is in meters, Maya is in centimeters, so there are some issues with scale. If you're going back and forth and you're trying to kind of keep everything synced, you just have to understand that when you come into Blender, a scale of 1 centimeter is going to come into Blender at 0.01. If you're working at scale in Blender and you take it to Maya, then you're going to end up with a scale of 100. Now, I want you to look at something, the dimensions versus scale. The scale is at the scale is at 1. That is its like default state, but the dimensions are 100 centimeters. So you know when this goes back to Maya, it's going to come in big. It's set to centimeters to display just so you can see the difference. But just keep in mind that when you're transferring back and forth, if you don't want to work on a scaled object in Blender that's 0.01, you can scale up everything, but then when you export it, you have to adjust for the scale. So scale management, you kind of have to work on being aware of its issues, because in Blender, when we go to import an FBX, there is a scale factor, and this scale means scale of 1, but that just means a scale of 1 Blender unit. And then down here under the armature, by default, ignore leaf bones is turned off, and that means that you're going to end up with an armature with lots of little end joints. So the settings for FBX bringing a file in, most of the time, you're probably going to turn on ignore leaf joints so it's not building other things. You're going to not use any other setting here. The scale, here you can choose 0.01 if you know that you want to convert the scale on import, or you can have it manage the scale to the best of its abilities. And then you can add this as a new preset from Maya. Common roadblocks. The moment you start exploring Blender, the other parts of the muscle memory from Maya you're going to hit. I want to change my gizmo size. You can't. It's in preferences. When I rotate something, typically your mouse is going to be on the object that you just clicked. And so if you click rotate with the gizmo, it's going to give you a Maya-like gizmo, but you can't click far away from it without scaling it. If I hit my key while I'm close to it, now my rotation is super, super touchy. If I hit rotation out here, it's more like we've scaled our gizmo. All right. But if you are using gizmos to manipulate your object and you want to change the size, there is an add-on for it I've linked you to, but otherwise you need to go into preferences, interface, and then you can change the gizmo size. Right here, gizmo size. If you want to reset it back to default, you can always right-click and say reset to default, and backspace is the hotkey. Hovering over the menu item often tells you what it is, but if you right-click, it'll give you the shortcut key, and right now, reset to default is what we're going to do. Okay, pick walking. Yes, Blender gives you pick walking with the brackets, lets you go up and down the hierarchy, but not sideways like Maya can. So your mileage may vary. You can flip left to right, which is awesome for like a rig with your animation controls, but it doesn't really let you work with just objects positionally. It's based on name. The G key, repeat last. If you're doing constraints, this is a huge help in Maya, using the last command, hitting the G key all the time to redo something. Just, I can't live without it personally. And then history. Objects in Blender do not have history in the same way that Maya or Max does. There's not a parameterization. It's basically, you can adjust it at creation or while you're working on the tool, and then it goes away and it's baked. I'm going to add a mesh cube, and down here, there's a tiny little checkbox here that comes up. If you miss it, you can go up and say edit, adjust last operation, or hit F9. And wherever you click, your mouse is going to pop up, so be careful when you move, because it's going to come up where your mouse is. So now I I can adjust the history of this object's creation. I can align it, I can move it. Once I'm done, if I create another object, I can't get back to this object. There's no operation for this anymore. It's created. So just be aware, there's limited history. The interactivity of this is really cool, though, when you're doing things like proportional modification. Go into edit mode, let's say, and I'm going to click a point and I'm going to drag it. This operation is live. I can turn on proportional editing. I can change the size and actually interactively adjust this last operation. I can change how far it moved, and I can basically just live edit this stuff. Where's my channel box? You can't edit more than one value at a time without using the Alt key. Custom properties on a rig do not allow Alt. So when you're messing with a rig property like IKFK or trying to turn on and off buttons, those don't work. So you have to do those one at a time. I'll show you the graph editor example in a second. So let me go ahead and create. So where's my channel box? The N key is what shows up over here to kind of get access to this panel on the side. And if you look at your view menu here for this window, and this happens to be also down here as well. There's a view menu on the side for a lot of your windows. This is your channel box information for your objects, your location, and then you have object properties down here. So there's a bunch of other settings for your objects over in this object properties box, and then the mesh is down here in like sub-object mode. So this area is like a mix between your channel box and your attribute editor. So let's look at transforms for a second. If I grab all these objects and I want to move them together, let's say I just want to scale everything together. Right now it's only using the x-axis for this one object. When I hold Alt down, now it's going to scale all of those objects. All the animators ask when they're starting to animate stuff, how do I edit multiple keys? How do I mess with handles? All of this stuff is controllable with the Alt key, but you also have to know how to find it, and there's some trickiness to get this to work. So also, if you're trying to filter the visibility of your handles and kind of clean up the display, under the view menu, there's only selected curve keyframes and only selected keyframe handles versus showing all. You can see this gets pretty busy right away. So I'm going to set my view to say only selected curve keyframes. And now we can turn off view only selected keyframe handles. If you turn that off, you can see all the handles and you can manipulate them. You can select them, or you can keep that on to say only selected keyframe handles. And when you click this, then the handle shows up. How do I manipulate this key? So if I just select this, nothing changes over here. If I grab all the keys and I hit rotate, right now it's rotating the object all around kind of an invisible center point. We can change all of that over here to be individual centers, and now when I rotate, I can kind of rotate the keys handles. If I scale, it's going to scale the handles. Right-clicking gives you options to set handles and all the other stuff you expect, but I want to edit key values. So if we look over here, I've showed my side panel with the N key or gone to the view. I want to select everything, and then I can shift-click and grab just that last keyframe. What you want is this active keyframe section. Just like before, if we have the last keyframe selected, that's what you get control over. If I hold Alt down, I can now manipulate all of the selected. If I hold Alt down, I can move the value of all the keys selected. I can adjust individual handles, lengths, and their value. Blender animation speed bumps. Where does my animation live? Two kinds of animation. For a character rig, it's going to be this mode called pose. Object animation lives at the object level. This is what you'd expect out of Maya's regular transform node. So the action editor lets you see and control what animation is assigned to these actions. Push down and stash are related to kind of storing actions, but it really shows up in the NLA. So right now I want you to think about the NLA as a view of actions, and then you can start to create clips because this is both a view of the timeline and each action on that timeline. But as soon as you push this down, we now turn the action into a clip. And that removes the animation from the scene level. So there are no more keys on this object. It's stored in an action and it's been removed. Let's say I delete this. Now there's no more animation on my object. I want that animation back on there. So I can jump over to my action editor. I can grab this and I can say, hey, you know what? I want the action on cube 2. I want to put its action back at scene level as just keyframes. How does this work as animation layers? If we go back to the NLA and I push this action down for cube 2, I'm going to go ahead and filter for only selected objects, so I'm not looking at everything else. This no action is the global timeline. And if you click this, you can see over here that there are settings to basically replace, do add or combine. There's all kinds of settings. If I want an animation layer like effect for this cube, I can switch this to basically be additive. So now when I set a keyframe, I can move it over. Now you can see that it's starting to mix and blend and become a layer. So this is an additive action, and I can push that down. And now this property, this clip, is an additive clip. It stores the animation. I can scale it. I can do all kinds of stuff to it. But it is, by itself now, an animation layer. I can hit Tab to jump down and edit my keys. I can drag this out, jump back out, and it updates the clip now in the new version of Blender. So I can go in and still work on my actions, but I have to go into edit mode for them. If I go into edit mode, then I can go back to my graph editor and see the keys. As soon as I'm out of that edit mode, those keys disappear. And now I can start adding more animation. I can add one key that moves the whole object over. Right. If this is in replace mode, then I'm actually replacing the animation. So if I set a key over here, now it's completely replacing all the animation below it. I'm going to add an armature. And so now I have a single bone, creates an armature and a bone. All of the bones within this armature will have one action. I can globally keyframe the actual whole armature in object mode. If I grab this and move it around, I'm moving the entire animation like a group node, and that's at the armature level. If I want to actually keyframe bones, I need to jump down into pose mode, and now I can actually keyframe and manipulate the bone itself. Now, I've shown you the problem with actions being separated across all the objects and how the bones in Blender are kind of contained inside of their armature object. The first rigging question that comes to mind when people come over from from Maya to Blender: how do I group things together and build a hierarchy and start animating? Well, the reality is you don't really. You're going to find most rigs in Blender are all armature and all bones, even the controls. It'd be like building all of your controls in Maya out of joints and only using joints for all of the connections. The word group has old history, and it's more like the way Macs quote-unquote group something, which is just collecting things under like a container. That's how it used to work. Groups have gone away as a concept, and so when you say group to Blender users, they don't understand. So don't even say it. What you actually mean is parent something under an empty object or empty transform. Armatures have their own rules and systems, their own parenting, their own relationship, including layers that are separate from objects. The pose mode is 0 for animation controls. So wherever the bone is, when you 0 the bone, it goes back to that bind pose. In pose mode, there is the option to go in and change how the bones look. You can add custom curves to them. You don't have to do any crazy parent, shape, script trickery. The object you can pick an object and it becomes the shape of that bone. Quick rig. So Maya has quick rig and Max has biped. We search for Rigify and we turn this on, and now we get a new tab here. But the other thing that happens is when we go to armature, now you get things like make a human. And then this meta rig is allowing you to basically start doing a quick rig type setup, where when you go into Rigify, we can generate a rig, and it's going to basically build control objects for us. Now this meta rig no longer is important, so I'm going to hide that. I'm going to control spacebar and go full screen for a second so we can look at this object. So as I said before, this is now at the armature level. I can move and position the whole transform for the character anywhere I want. This is not pose mode. So be careful when you offset your stuff around that you are not moving it by mistake. I grab this and I want to manipulate the controls, and the first thing that you're going to struggle with is like, how do I do that? And that's because you've got to go to pose mode. So now we see a control rig that we expect. Controls that have settings like neck follow and head follow, IK, FK switching. If I grab the hand, you can see here there are settings. You can also see that there are layers. And when I grab something like, say, the hips, the layer that it's on fills in. By default, there's no way to really name bone layers. This protected just means, like, think about Maya's template or reference. But in this case, if I select an object and I'm trying to figure out where this rig is, the layer that it's on shows up as a white dot. So I can go, oh, okay, this is the layer that it's on. Here are all the deformation bones. And they're named DEF, right? And again, they have that setting on it per bone, deform. If we go back and look at the layers for rig controls, let's turn on the leg and grab one of these. You can see that it does not have the deform option checked. And why is that important? Well, if we go back to object mode and I show all of these settings, right, we know that these are all bone objects. If we were to create a mesh, this is going to be the most complicated rig for a cube you've ever seen. If we were to attach this rig to the Rigify rig, then it's going to only skin automatically to the groups that are marked as deform. In the object properties down here under data properties, you can see it's created a vertex group for each bone. And only the DEF bones are in here. Okay, let's take a look at the next question that comes up all the time. Where's my node editor? Well, the easy answer is there isn't one. There are node editors for other things inside of Blender, but it's not the same as the graphing connections system that you can expect to find in other software. Just the outliner. The other related kind of things people miss right away, or the things I missed right away, where's my shelf? I want a place to stick scripting code real quick just to have a way to execute it. Unfortunately, there isn't one. So I found an add-on called Script a Button, and this is my shelf replacement for now. It's context-free, meaning you can run the script in the window it's supposed to run without having to code it for that window. Let's jump back to layout and look at how we discover information about our objects. So the Rigify rig is pretty complex. We've looked at layers a little bit and how the armature has all this stuff hidden away. It's got its own bone groups. And we looked at how selecting things shows the layer and what it's on. That took me so long to realize what was going on, and it shouldn't have, but it's just one of those things that, you select stuff and go, where is that? Well, if it's on a layer that is not visible, it's just this little filled in dot, you're going to have trouble with things, including adding constraints. So what do I mean by this? Well, let's take a look over here. The outliner gives us information like, hey, there's a little avocado. Well, that means constraint. And there's a equal avocado tab down here called object constraint properties. If I'm on this mechanical bone, right, this is the rigging bone for this rig. They're all called MCH. All of these bones are hidden away on a layer. So first of all, I selected I can't find it. But if I just wanted to check what this constraint was doing, I'd have to expand this and go down and grab it and then switch to constraint mode if I pick this object. But you can see it's not working because this object's not visible. Blender really hides away stuff. When something's not visible, the UI does not update. So we can show that, or I can just click on the avocado in the outliner constraint, and it will jump to the constraint, and I can see, hey, here are the bone targets. It's called, it's constraining the torso parent to the root. Well, I want to go grab the root bone, so I can right-click and say jump to target. And now it selects the target, and that way I can see, oh, it's constrained to this item. We mentioned set-driven key or drivers. Well, this wait command here is purple, so I know that that has a driver. And right at the end, there's a little zigzag arrow. That means, hey, this has got a driven property. If I click on it, it also shows me the variable, or I can right-click, and I can go to Open Drivers Editor, and I can go in and edit and see what the driver's doing. This is the main way you're going to work with the node editor. There are a lot of ways to filter this. You can filter for constraints. Is it visible in the render? Is it visible at all? Is it selectable? So the other thing that really throws me off is, you can have stuff that you're trying to select, and it's over here. There's a little tick mark that basically makes it selectable. So another place to pay attention to, something that might be on a Maya layer for display, like template or reference, you're going to find that it could possibly just be a selection set or individual object. Blender does not do hierarchy visibility, so each object can actually be visible or invisible. The skin cluster in Blender is the armature modifier. Weights are managed through vertex groups. Again, think Maya sets or bone envelopes, like Max or Maya envelopes. There are some settings directly on the armature. Preserve volume sounds great. What it really is dual quaternion skinning. The bind pose is the rest pose, and it is whatever the state the edit mode is. I've skinned this cube, and skinning is basically parenting. If I clear parent, when an object is a child of the armature. So if you skin something, here this rig has the mesh as a child of it. All the skinning information is stored in vertex groups. So if I was to unparent this, clear parent, and I reskin it, I add a new modifier. Once this object has been associated with skinning, all of that skinning information is stored on the object. So if we look in this item here, we look at vertex groups, you can see that here are all of the groups that are named for the bone that they were assigned to. We can go to weight paint mode. And you can see that the weights are still stored on this object, how they were skinned to the original rig. So when I work on a mesh, or if I delete the vertices, they're going to update the skinning, and I don't actually lose any information. That's really powerful. If I want to skin this object to this armature, I'm going to grab the object in the armature and parent, object, parent. And I can choose armature deform, which basically just parents the object back to the rig, and it doesn't do anything with the vertex groups. It doesn't change them, it just reattaches. If I want to recalculate or reskin it like I would in Maya, I can do object parent or Control P and tell it to use empty groups. So it'll create the groups, but it won't weight anything, basically adding them with locked influences in Maya. I can do envelope weights, so if I was to actually use the bone length envelope information, or I can do automatic weights, which just handles vertex groups. Where are my skinning tools? I'm not going to go through all these tools. There's some great information from Armin on tutorials on just all the weight painting as well as other resources, but just know a couple things. Blender weights act like post deformation in Maya, where it mixes all of the weighting for you to try to keep it from double transforming, but by default it's going to paint more than 0 to 1. Having weight maps and vertex groups on the mesh mean it doesn't break with the mesh changes, so you can smooth your mesh and it will reinterpret the weights. Assign automatic from bone is add influences. There's a video here to cover this, the weight hammer, and copy skin weights. Mirror weights doesn't do vertex groups. These are interesting problems. Mirror weights doesn't act the way you'd expect it to, and there's a script from Bayrate I'll link you to that will help you mirror vertex groups, but just understand that the actual paint tool itself has mirror. If we look at the smooth operator, you can set it to say all groups, and now I can interactively adjust the smoothing of the skin weights. How many iterations, expand, contract, all this stuff is an interactive modifier before I cook it down. So that's really pretty powerful. If you're just trying to set weighting, all that information per vertex here is going to show up in the item menu. This took me a little while to figure out, but this was where it is under the item menu. So you can see all or only deform weights, which is important when you're trying to, if you have vertex groups that are doing other things. Then you can copy other weights. So let's say that I like the weighting on this to the right hand. So I'm going to grab everything, and then I'm going to grab this one last, and then I'm just going to say paste that weight to everything else for the hand. Okay, let's talk about blend shapes. You would expect this to be a modifier inside of Blender, but it's not. Much like all the vertex skinning information, shape keys are handled and managed on the object. Again, it keeps it from being fragile, but all of your kind of tools and settings are going to be down inside the object itself. We're going to close vertex groups for a second, and now we can look at shape keys. I can add a shape key, and this starts, it's always, the first one is the basis. So this is like our standard base deformation. Then I can add another key, and this is going to start to be what I edit. So I can turn on edit mode. I can go to edit mode here, and I can drag out a mirrored vertex because I turned on mirror up here. And now I can see this is the value of my blend shape. Deformers. Nonlinear deformers in Maya are actually called simple deform, and it's a modifier. So here is a simple deform modifier, and it's a bend, and I can change the bend angle, and I can change which axis. You can duplicate this a couple times. You can apply it as a shape key. So if I duplicate this and set it to taper, now I'm able to mix the two results. Delta mush. This was actually not a lot of Blender users even knew what this was. Smooth corrective. This is delta mush. It's just like delta mush as you'd expect. You can actually change bind coordinates or original. You can only smooth like a regular smooth. But this is your delta mush. If you want to limit it to vertex group to just work on a certain part, that's what you're going to find is a smooth corrective modifier. Now it's called the smooth corrective modifier, but it's corrective smooth inside the UI. That's it. We've covered a lot. I wanted to really just show you the things that I immediately struggled with when I first got into Blender. So I know this was kind of a lot. I want you to really be able to quickly go through the tools and start to get a wide view of where all the stuff is. And then through the slides and links, hopefully you can find more. That's it. QA time. Thank you so much. Any extra questions, you can find us on Twitter at Rigging Dojo. I'm also on the Anim State Discord. So if you find me in there, you can ask me questions. And then we've got time now for questions. So thank you, everybody.